Welcome to the 700 Club. Thanks for joining us. Last night, there was yet another senseless mass shooting. A gunman killed 8 people, injured several others at a FedEx facility near the airport in Indianapolis. Then he killed himself.
It was the 3rd mass shooting this year in Indianapolis. Investigators were on the scene early today, gathering information to figure out exactly what happened. Ephraim Graham has the story.
5 people were hospitalized, 1 with critical injuries after the shooting. And FedEx said people who worked for the company were among the dead. Police were called about 11 o'clock last night. When they arrived on scene, they found the gunman was still shooting.
As officers were responded, they arrived to an active shooter incident at that location.
An eyewitness at the scene, Jeremiah Miller, told Wish Television, at first he thought the shots were a car muffler or an engine, but then he heard 6 to 10 shots.
This made me stand up and actually look at the entrance door, and I saw a man with a submachine gun of some sort, an automatic rifle, and he was firing in the open. And I immediately ducked down and got scared.
The shooter wasn't immediately identified, and it wasn't known if he was an employee at the facility. One worker at the building said he heard gunshots while on break.
Then we heard 3 more shots, and then my buddy Levi saw someone running out of the building, and then more shots went off. Somebody went behind their car to the trunk and got another gun, and then I saw 1 body on the floor.
FedEx says it is cooperating with authorities as they investigate this tragic shooting. And family members gathered at a nearby hotel to wait for word on their loved ones. Ephraim Graham, CBN News.
Well, this is yet another horrific incident. You look at just that one city, Indianapolis, you have 3 mass shootings in just a short space of time. Will we ever find out the motive? I don't know. What would prompt someone to do this kind of thing? Here in Virginia Beach, we had a senseless mass shooting. We still don't know the motivation and what was the reason behind it. Let us, as Christians, realize that in the Bible, there's a really curious phrase: when that which restrains is taken away. And when you look at that, it sends a chill through your soul. What about our culture has been taken away so that people no longer have restraint, no longer want to observe the commandment, thou shalt not kill? And doing this on a regular basis, where it's this suicide gunman, I'm going to kill as many people as I possibly can, then I'm going to turn the weapon on myself and I'm going to die in this blaze of carnage. What is not restraining in our culture today? And if that which restrains has been taken away, can we please pray to God, please return our restraints? Turning now to the news from Washington, where the Democrats are going to be packing the Supreme Court. The Democrats on Capitol Hill want to add 4 more justices to the bench, and that move is getting pushback from both parties. Jennifer Wishon explains.
The Constitution leaves the number of justices on the Supreme Court up to Congress, and some Democrats say it's time to add more. Standing in front of the Supreme Court Thursday, congressional Democrats introduced the Judiciary Act of 2021. They say the court's standing is damaged because President Trump and Senate Republicans added 3 new justices.
And the way we repair it is straightforward. We undo the damage that the Republicans have done by restoring balance. And we do it by adding 4 seats to the court to create a 13-member Supreme Court.
4 new seats to be filled by President Biden.
Some people will say we're packing the court. We're not packing it, we're unpacking it. Senator McConnell and the Republicans packed the court over the last couple of years.
Liberal activists had pushed for the idea, but not all Democrats are on board.
I think if you try to expand it right now, that's going to further polarize and tear apart this country.
Packing the court was a big issue during the election, and last week President Biden set up a commission to look at possible court reforms.
One of the issues they'll look at is, of course, the size of the court, but they'll also look at the court's role in the constitutional system, the length of service, the turnover of justices.
For now, Speaker Nancy Pelosi says she's not bringing the bill to the House floor.
I don't know that that's a good idea or a bad idea. I think it's an idea that should be considered, and I think the president's taken the right approach to have a commission to study such a thing. It's a big step.
She clearly doesn't have the vote. She's a good vote counter. She does not have the votes on the House floor. She doesn't have those moderate Democrats to go along. But if you have the commission that she supports and you go with that first and then you get the commission results, then the bill, I think that's the trick for Democrats of how they're going to try to do this.
Republicans say it's another example of Democrats wanting to change the rules when they don't get their way.
Now, if Republicans had introduced a bill to add 4 Supreme Court seats for the last president to fill, there would have been weeks of wall-to-wall outrage on every newspaper and cable TV channel.
The president famously didn't take a position on the issue during the campaign, but he did say this.
I've already spoken on, I'm not a fan of court packing.
And the late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a liberal icon, was also against it, telling NPR in 2019, 9 seems to be a good number.
Well, if anything would make the court appear partisan, it would be that. One side saying, when we're in power, we're going to enlarge the number of judges, so we will have more people who will vote the way we want them to.
In a speech last week, Justice Stephen Breyer, appointed by President Clinton, spoke against court packing, saying, "Think long and hard before embodying those changes in law." It's not popular among Americans. A New York Times poll conducted last fall found 58% oppose packing the court. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
There's a social contract in America, and I think we're losing sight of that social contract on both sides. That when parties get into power, they suddenly now want to drive through these agendas in order to appeal to extreme wings on both sides. But in that, you're going to lose the middle. And when you lose the social contract, you've lost a great deal. We've already seen what happens when you start to bring into question the integrity of the election process. But when you bring into a question the integrity of the Supreme Court, right now there's no governance over the Supreme Court. Once they rule, it's the established law of the land. But if you pack that court, if you change the social contract, what happens when the population says, well, this is all partisan politics, we're not going to follow what the Supreme Court does? Are you bringing into question the very basic of our social contract, which is the rule of law? When you start saying laws aren't being properly made and judicial decisions aren't being properly made, you're breaking the social contract. That is horrific in our current culture. We are so polarized, we can't come together at all. You can't even have a cup of coffee with somebody on the other side, let alone try to come to a bipartisan agreement about a bill. Imagine what would happen if the Supreme Court becomes this partisan body pushing a progressive agenda. It will tear the nation apart. Please do not do this. Well, in the news, we've got another partisan effort. Democrats are pushing to make Washington, D.C. the 51st state. That would drive a partisan Senate. What's going on is they want to ensure a Democratic majority in the U.S. Senate. Because if D.C. gets a statehood, they get 2 extra senators, and you're pretty much sure that there's going to be Democrats. So let's go to Ephraim Graham for that story from the CBN Newsroom. Ephraim?
Gordon, the House Oversight Committee passed the bill which would make D.C. a state. It'd be called Washington Douglas Commonwealth. The measure passed on a party line vote with Democrats supporting it, but no Republicans. Democrats argue D.C. should be a state because its residents pay federal taxes without representation in the federal government. The full House is set to vote on the bill next week, but it faces major problems in the Senate, where it died last year after the House passed it. Not all Senate Democrats support it, and Republicans argue the Democrats just want the additional 2 senators who will likely vote with them. The Biden administration is imposing sweeping sanctions on Russia and expelling 10 Russian diplomats. The moves are meant to punish Russia for interfering in U.S. elections and hacking into federal agencies. The president saying the U.S. does not want to kick off a cycle of escalation and conflict with Russia, but he would take more action if necessary. Russia promised retaliation. The president did say he hopes Vladimir Putin will meet with him for a summit in Europe this summer. A showdown in Congress Thursday between Dr. Anthony Fauci and Ohio Republican Congressman Jim Jordan over what it will take to reopen more of the country from the COVID-19 lockdowns.
When do we get to the point, what measure, what standard, what objective outcome do we have to reach before Americans get their liberty and freedoms back?
You know, you're indicating liberty and freedom. I look at it as a public health measure to prevent people from dying and going to the hospital.
You don't think Americans' liberties have been threatened the last year, Dr. Fauci? They've been assaulted. Their liberties have.
I don't look at this as a liberty thing, Congressman Jordan.
Well, that's obvious.
As a public health thing.
Fauci went on to say he believes the U.S. is at a crossroads in fighting the pandemic, with vaccines rolling out, but cases still going up in some states. Turning now to Israel, which will reopen its skies to small groups of vaccinated tourists starting next month after a year of being closed. That's because Israel is moving to revive its economy now that more than half of the population has received both doses of the COVID vaccine. As Chris Mitchell reports, a major part of the recovery includes a controversial green pass.
The so-called passport is being offered only to those fully vaccinated or who have recovered from COVID-19.
Either get the vaccine or avoid certain kinds of risky interactions with others.
Only the passport holders will be allowed to eat inside restaurants, go to the gym and swimming pool, enter houses of worship, attend other various events, and fly into the country without quarantining.
If someone decides not to get the vaccine, they are within their right to do so. But it's also true that they should be the ones who bear the cost of this poor decision.
Those without a green pass can also have a negative PCR test a maximum of 72 hours before an event. Tourists must have a negative PCR test before boarding the plane to Israel, and when they land as well, have a serology test at Ben Gurion Airport to prove they've been vaccinated. Israel is working with other countries to find a method for recognizing each other's vaccines. Some feel the Green Pass program is government overreach and possibly illegal.
The WHO and most of the governments in the world so far, certainly the United States, has not adopted this measure. Even if you want to vaccinate, one has to be careful in not forcing vaccination.
Renowned immunologist Dr. Zvi Bentwich of Ben Gurion University is part of the Emergency Public Council for the coronavirus crisis. The group, comprised of doctors, scientists, and others, have filed a lawsuit with the Supreme Court, calling the Green Pass coercive and predatory.
We are not against vaccination, but we are against the usage of a measure that would cause discrimination and enforcement of measures that would impinge on basically on human rights.
Professor David Enoch at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem disagrees.
When done properly, it does not violate human or civil rights. Giving at least a fairly successful vaccination effort, Green Passport policy is the way to do that.
Having a policy, let's say in restaurants, that everybody will wear a mask and there would be some sort of distancing, but by saying that you cannot enter a place unless you have this passport, that's a different story.
Many Israelis hope that once herd immunity is achieved, green passes and other restrictions will be unnecessary, so life can just return to normal. Meanwhile, these passports will rule the day. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Debates on these passports likely to unfold in other countries as well. Gordon?
I think the debate's going to come right here to the United States, and you look at past histories of pandemics, you see governments really trying to enforce quarantines. My mother had scarlet fever as a child, and her entire household was quarantined. And that was enforced, and it meant that they couldn't leave the house, period. They had to close all the windows. They were in an enforced quarantine. So has it happened here in America? The answer is yeah. Will it happen again? I'm not so sure. And when you get into what does this really mean for the average citizen, and certainly what does it mean to the poor in our culture? Do they have access to medical care? Do they have access to vaccinations? And then you get into the whole issue of enforced vaccination. And will this be a de facto thing where if you, in good conscience, say, I don't want to take this, I think it's too experimental. I want to have children. I'm worried about what mRNA can do. We don't know these things. So it's going to open a whole bunch of questions, and our civil liberties are going to be a part of that debate. But will it actually come? Not so sure here in America, but it's definitely going to come to international travel. And I see the countries all around the world saying you don't get to land in our airport if you don't have a vaccine card, if you're not protected from this. We don't want to import the pandemic yet again.